Hello, all, and welcome to episode 2 of Point to Point, a hockey podcast where we keep things brief but break down everything going around in the National Hockey League. My name is Liam Gotimer. Alongside me is Michael Shades Sparacino. Shades, thank you for joining me once again.
Great to be back. Episode number 2.
So, Shades, we had a lot to talk about in episode number 1.
Yes.
We still have a lot to talk about in episode number 2.
Oh, yeah.
Things did not slow down around the NHL. And let's start off with a team that made waves during our last episode, and that was the Washington Capitals. We discussed, of course, the sign and trade for Alex Tuch and the acquisition of Jordan Kyrou. But Shades, they did not stop there. And of course, we will get to the number one re-signing we could talk about in just a moment. But aside from that, Shades, we have really seen the Washington Capitals completely change their forward group. They even added Vincent Desharnais on their defense. But just talk about overall how much they've completely changed their team.
I just have to say that the last couple of years, the Washington Capitals have been the prime example of an almost perfect retool on the fly. I mean, obviously, back in 2018, they won the Stanley Cup and then proceeded to get bounced in the first round the next couple of years. But especially over the last 3 years, they end up winning a President's Trophy. And now they make all these moves to put them in a prime position to get back into Stanley Cup contention. And I think they are a legitimate contender after all these moves.
After all of these moves, Shades, the Capitals have added the following forwards to their unit up front. Alex Tuch, who of course is signed to that massive 8-year, $10.5 million per season contract. You add Jordan Kyrou. You add Boone Jenner as well. Jenner, I will mention, has experience playing in the division. It matters. You have players that have exploded within the bottom six going back to last year, like Justin Sourdif and Anthony Beauvillier, who has just fit in like a glove. Shades, I couldn't agree with you more. I think they are legitimate contenders for the Stanley Cup, and I think you really put it perfectly when you said this is an example of how every team should try and retool on the fly. It's
I mean,
impressive.
you want to talk about fitting in like a glove. Look at their first line center in Dylan Strome. Everyone after his time in Arizona was kind of questioning that acquisition, but he not only has developed into a number one center, but he has been part of the solution to that team. And you kind of love to see when a top former 3 overall pick kind of puts it all together. And just like you said, with the rest of the acquisitions and Tuck, Kyrou, Boone Jenner, and Desharnais on the back end, I mean, they just have a solid, arguably top 3 forward group in the league at the current moment with a pretty good defensive core and pretty good goalie tandem to back them up. So just exquisite general managing. And shout out to Spencer Carberry for the coaching he's done there. Just excellent.
Well said, Shades. And the last point I want to make on the Washington Capitals. Yesterday, it was announced that Alexander Ovechkin will be coming back for his 22nd season in the National Hockey League.
You love to see it. One of my all-time favorite players, greatest goal scorer of all time. I I'm definitely gonna cry when he announces or plays his last game.
He joins 2 other players to have played 22 seasons with one franchise, Steve Yzerman and Sidney Crosby. He has 929 career goals. Absolutely unbelievable. And you're bringing Ovechkin back if you're the Capitals to play alongside, I would argue, the best forward group he has ever played alongside. That's even
And
going back to 2018.
and that says a lot because they had some pretty darn good forward groups in those early 2010s.
Right on. So I think that's a great way to wrap up the Washington Capitals. And Shades, another team I wanted to touch on in a very similar light, the Toronto Maple Leafs. You talk about a team that completely overhauled their roster like the Capitals. You could say the same about Toronto.
I'm not as optimistic that Toronto is going to make this massive jump back into the playoffs just based on what we saw last season. And I still do think that their defense needs work. I mean, they have one defenseman under 30 years of age in Emile Andre, who is still unsigned but recently acquired. Darren Radish, we all like him as a player, but as soon as we saw the 8-year contract for a defenseman at 30 years old at 8.5 million, definitely raises some eyebrows. But you are going to have a very much needed injection of youth with the first overall pick in Gavin McKenna. They do have a very solid top six forward group, but the depth there with the overall defense does concern me quite a little bit.
Let me ask you a question. Do you think John Shaka is taking the right route with this team after being gifted the number one overall draft pick? Do you think trying to run this team back into contention is the right way to go?
I think that should be every general manager's goal is with the position that they were in this past season. If you're not trying to get back in contention, you're either in a full rebuild or you're stuck in the dreaded middle. But to answer your question, I do think he did take a lot of positive steps. Again, it does help when you do have a first overall pick, but the question I have about this team is how effective is their forward depth going to be, and how effective is their older defense core going to be that I'm bringing up for a second time. But Sergei Bobrovsky coming in, we do question the contract a little bit for the age he's at 37. But I think that was a move that they desperately needed to make after letting Joseph Woll go.
The forward group doesn't concern me. I actually like the forward group on paper. I like Roslovic. I've been a big fan of Bluger. I think Nyes broke out last year. I think Tavares still adds that veteran leadership that every team needs. Nylander looks a lot better at $11.5 million than he did a couple of years ago. I think McKenna, if he plays out as many prospects or many scouts rather think he's going to play out, he's going to be a legit number one winger. And then Austin Matthews too, the man that you have to keep happy. So, I think the forward group is okay. The defense is what worries me. The Radish contract, I think, raised a lot of eyebrows around the league. For me, Bobrovsky too. I know the term isn't that long, but $7 million for a goaltender that had the worst year of his career last year, it just it makes me just think twice. I think they got better for sure, but I don't know if this is necessarily the right direction. But time will tell on where the Toronto Maple Leafs are headed. Shades, my next topic I want to talk about is something that transpired prior to last week's episode, and that was Jason Robertson, who is still unsigned and remains a restricted free agent as a member of the Dallas Stars. Shades, Dallas traded Jason Robertson over to the Seattle Kraken, and Seattle gave up a top 10 pick in the NHL draft, and Jason Robertson and the Kraken were not able to hash out a contract. And after the Stars go back to the drawing board, they're not able to get a long-term extension done with him either. This is getting a little messy.
That is putting it lightly. So, from what I've been able to gather, they are between Jason Robertson and the Stars, they are very far apart, or what seems to be very far apart in terms of a figure with the contract extension. He's coming off a 45 goal, 96-point season and is looking to be the highest paid forward on the team, getting above Mikko Rantanen's 12 million a year, which to me he fully deserves, and I think the starting price for him should be around 13 million, if not a little higher. Now, they just signed or re-signed Jamie Benn this morning to a 1-year deal, 850,000, bringing their captain back. And the thing that really concerns me here is, according to Puckpedia, they have just under $9.8 million in cap space. And when you kind of look at who they would have to move for a Robertson extension to be realistic, You have Matt Duchene with a full no move clause this year at 4.5 million. He's also signed through 2029. You're getting into the last year of Tyler Sagan's contract at 9.85 million. He also has a full no move clause. So my question to you is, who do they move? Because out of the contracts that are available to move, that will be able to fit an extension in with Robertson, you can't move Essa Lindell because he's your best defenseman, arguably behind Harley Thomas. Miro Heiskanen is more of a two-way guy, but I think Essa Lindell is the best defensive defenseman on that team and arguably one of the more underrated defensive defensemen in the league. But there's not a lot of wiggle room with how they can make that work. So there's a giant question mark as to what's going to happen here.
This is a tough year for Robertson to need a new contract because, things could be a lot easier for Dallas if Sagan's 9.85 came off of the books. But, it's going to be another year until that happens. They kind of did this to themselves, right? I see five really big contracts here on the board. Wyatt Johnston, Mikko Rantanen, Rope Hintz, who had very good early stages of his contract, but he's making $8.5 million now. Thomas Harley, who you touched on, he's making $11 million. Ottinger making close to nine. Heiskanen also close to nine. I totally agree with you. You do not move on from Essa Lindell, but they're in a little bit of a situation here and trading away, a lower salaried player like Radek Faksa, who makes $2 million, that doesn't really help you because $11 million is not going to sign Jason Robertson. So the only way out, there's two ways out. You trade away Jason Robertson, and the amount of teams that he would be willing to sign with have been limited, have shown to be limited, or you trade away one of your high impact players in order to bring him back. And I don't know how that brings you closer to Stanley Cup contention, you know? Like if you trade Rope Hintz to sign Jason Robertson, are you more of a contender than you were? I don't know. So and this team hasn't been able to get off over the hump when they've been all together. So that's interesting as well. Definitely one of the most interesting storylines that we're all waiting to see how it plays out as the offseason moves along. But no doubt, Jason Robertson is a 100-point player. He is as impactful as it gets on the trade market right now up front.
I would just
Shades,
like to add one more thing.
yeah, for sure.
If you just look around the league in current cap space, there's only really a handful of teams that are able to give Robertson the contract that he deserves value-wise. But I haven't been able to do a full in-depth look at which teams are realistic in sending a package that's worthy of a trade to Dallas.
Well, I think now that the NHL draft has come to a close, I think that gets more difficult. Finding
Absolutely.
a way to match the value for what the Dallas Stars are looking for. Shades, our next topic is something that happened just yesterday at practice. The Chicago Blackhawks, their superstar and former number one overall pick, Connor Bedard, skates off in quite a bit of pain, clutching his shoulder. And he's already had a history of shoulder injuries at his young age.
Yes, he did miss 12 games last season with a right shoulder injury. The video that was circulating on social media yesterday showed that it was a non-contact fall where he came down on his left shoulder, which would be a new injury and not a re-injury. He gets up pretty much immediately and skates off the ice quickly, and you can clearly see he's heavily favoring the left shoulder. There hasn't been an update that I've seen, so we can't really speculate too much, but with a young player, the caliber that he is, being injury prone is terrifying if I'm the Blackhawks with the current situation that they're in.
Yeah, we talked about it last episode, right? About the acquisition of Bowen Byram and how pivotal of a season this was going to be for Chicago and general manager Kyle Davidson, who is building this team around Connor Bedard. This is not a good way to start. I don't really know how to absorb that information. You telling me that it's his other shoulder. On one hand, I'm happy for him that it's not a re-injury because then it can become a common occurrence throughout his career. And of course, Bedard is only 20 years old. But also on the other hand, both shoulders now having a history of injuries at such a young age doesn't sit too well with me either. And I will mention this on top of that, Shades. He's in the midst of contract negotiations with the Blackhawks.
He is. He is currently a restricted free agent without a contract, but as complete contrast to the Dallas Stars, the Blackhawks have $29 million to work with in current cap space, and they will be able to hash out a deal no problem.
I wasn't really coming at it from that perspective, to be honest. I was coming at it, do the Blackhawks think twice about maybe extending as long term as they had thought? This is two injuries in 2 years now. Of course, you don't want to speculate, but you know, 12 games last year, and now this year, right as you hit the ice, just not a good time for it, in my opinion. But I do agree with you. I think they have the money, and I think there is a will, which means there is a way to bring him back. But I think that was definitely a scary moment for a lot of Blackhawk fans. And Shades, let's transition to a scary moment for some Sharks fans. They sign Jacob Trouba to a 4-year, $8.25 million deal. I love Jacob, but he just continues to get paid, and good for him. But, it's to be seen how much value he adds to that Sharks team. And then Mike Greer doubles down on his acquisition of physical defensemen and trades a pretty good prospect in Shakir Makumadulin to Edmonton for the Darnell Nurse contract. This is changing up your roster just like Washington did, but I'm not sure if it's going to pay dividends as much as it's going to for the Capitals, in my opinion.
Definitely a large chunk of cap space taken up with those two. Also, do not forget, they also signed Mason Marchment to
Yeah.
a 5-year deal worth 5.7, or excuse me, 6.75 million. And as well as they traded for Kesselring a few days ago, and they gave him 3 years by 5.5 million. Those four guys, that's $30 million right there, which is over a fourth of the salary cap for questionable players to be brought in for a team that's looking to make the jump from rebuilder to hopeful slash contender.
Well said, Shades. And, as it stands right now, San Jose does have $14 million in cap space, even after bringing in all of those players. My question to you is, overall, looking at this roster, are they a playoff team out of the Pacific? I know there's more work to do, but does this elevate them? Because their one knack last year was that they were a young team and maybe at some points they struggled to close out games. Nurse and Truba help you do that if they're playing the right way, which, with a young team, I'd hope that they would. Truba helped out a little bit in Anaheim and, you know, Darnell Nurse, of course, two Stanley Cup appearances with the Oilers during his time there. So
Well, it all really comes down to specifically with the forward group. Are Will Smith and Michael Misa going to take large leaps forward? Is Mason Marchment going to come in and be a heavy producer for them? And then on the back end, is Truba going to continue to decline with his on ice play? And is Darnell's going to bounce back a little bit from what he was? If all of those things happen, they have a chance to be in playoff contention, but I still think they're a year away.
I would argue outside of Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, they have the best player in the division
In
in Matt.
Macklin Celebrini,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So, it just makes a difference to have somebody up front who can kind of anchor the young guys around him. So, you talk about Will Smith and, you talk about it being a big year for Michael Misa, who's playing alongside him. I would definitely agree, but I feel comfortable knowing that I have Celebrini. I do agree with you on the defense. I think the goaltending is actually pretty good. I like Askarov and Nedeljkovic. He's a guy who's had NHL time. He's only making $3 million against the cap. Eric Comrie is signed as well to the team, so there's depth there. I don't love it, but I don't hate it as much as many individuals around the NHL are viewing San Jose's offseason. And there was going to come a
And
time where Mike Greer was going to spend his cap space, and here we are.
And don't forget, during that whole spiel, I didn't even mention the second overall pick in Ivar Stenberg. If he can come in
Yeah.
and look like a legitimate player right away, coupled with everything that I said, they, again, do have a realistic shot at getting back into a playoff spot. But I do think, I'll call it right now, in 2 years, we'll be looking at them as a real contender.
I agree with you. Keaton Vierhoff as well acquired in the top 10 of the draft. So they have somebody that can make an impact up front and on the back end. Shades, we have three more topics for this episode of Point to Point, and we are transitioning straight to our beloved New York Rangers. We are New York Rangers fans, by the way, but we are hockey fans first and foremost. We talk about a retool. Well, the Rangers tried their hand at that. We saw the Capitals succeed in it. Now the Rangers are trying to do the same thing for a second time.
Yeah, and free agency was looking a little bleak yesterday,
Yeah.
or excuse me, 2 days ago with the Rangers because of just let's be honest with ourselves right now, one of the weakest free agent classes we've seen over the last 10 to 15 years. But instead of going the free agent route, they went the trade route, which just in general completely overshadowed free agency. But I digress. But they do bring in a couple players. I am going to start with the criticisms that I do have and then work my way up. The first and foremost one being the acquisition of goalie Jonas Korpisalo, who is coming off of a brutal 2 year stretch where they give up a 23-year-old prospect and a fourth round pick on top of that, when I think they would have been better off just bargain bin shopping a backup goalie for cheaper. And then I'm going to move on to the other signing that I had a massive problem with in Joe Veleno, who on a young up and coming Montreal team was a healthy scratch for a quarter of the season and half of their playoff run to the conference final. So I question how much value he can actually bring there. Now, on to the better but slightly questionable signing in Oliver Bjorkstrand. He has a history of 40 and 50-point seasons as a good middle six forward with the Columbus Blue Jackets. But after last year, it does raise a little concern because based on a conversation I had with one of my friends who does live in Florida and was watching the Lightning games last year almost religiously, he did say that Bjorkstrand did miss a lot of tip-ins and just had an overall brutal season. And then we get on to the Marcus Pettersson trade, the Vincent Trocheck trade, where we ship Trocheck off to Utah, brings back Sean Durzi and a young center prospect with high upside. And we get Marcus Pettersson from the Vancouver Canucks to shore up the second line of defense for a first round pick 4 years down the line. Time will tell whether or not that ends up being a good move. But as of right now, I say yes. And overall, acquiring him and Durzi, two guys that are reliable with the puck on their stick from the back end, especially Durzi that can skate if he can stay healthy. I would say the Rangers had a pretty good overall day in free agency that did warrant some criticism. But so far, Chris Drury's best offseason to date.
It is his best offseason to date. It all started, acquiring Pavel Dorofeyev, for a package that included the number 26 overall pick, I believe. Definitely top 20. You sign him to an extension, back-to-back 30-goal seasons. You replace kind of that absence up top from Artemi Panarin and his point production and goal scoring. So you're able to kind of mitigate that loss. So I like that. Addressing the Bjorkstrand signing, I mean, there's just no. I hear what you're saying, and I hear what your friend is saying, but there's no risk to a 1 year deal. There's just not. especially with the way the cap is. It's $4.5 million. He's going to slide into the top six. If it works, great. And if it doesn't work, he's an unrestricted free agent. You can move on from him. So I don't hate it, to be honest. 8 20-goal seasons under his belt. Not his best year last year, but kind of tough to break through on a Tampa Bay team that has depth for days up front. Now he's going to a Rangers team that doesn't. They really could use somebody to slot in on that right side in the top six. So maybe with there being a little bit more of a need for his services on the current team, I think we'll see a better season out of Bjorkstrand. Veleno, same thing, 1 year deal. I don't love the player, but he's 26. I mean, defensive centerman, stick him on that fourth line. I mean, again, there's just no risk to a 1 year deal for me. I don't love the Corpusalo deal, but like I said during Pucks and Brews, I just choose to combine the Corpusalo trade and the Will Borgen trade, where the Rangers walked out with a second and a third round pick and gave up a fourth and a prospect that was never going to make the National Hockey League. But I do agree with you that they could have just gone and signed a backup goaltender for $2 million cheaper, but the cap's not really an issue right now. Pedersen and Dursey, I mean, you just talk about completely transforming your defense. Well done from Drury. I think he understood that the Rangers' problems last year were leaving their goaltenders out to dry and failing to move the puck up with effectiveness. And you've completely changed that. You give up a first round pick, which is not great to get Pedersen, but hey, he's got 4 more years under contract and he's making $5.5 million. He's played under Mike Sullivan before. I think we're going to be okay. My last question for you on the Rangers shades before we move on to our second to last topic. Call it right now. Is this team a playoff team?
I'm gonna give you my cop-out answer that I give everyone every year. Ask me after the first 20 games of the season are played, because that's when we'll get a real answer as to what this team is trying slash supposed to be.
I'm not going to let you off the hook. Looking at them on paper right now, as it stands today, yes, no.
I'll say no with the chance to be yes, but officially I will say no.
Okay. I'm going to agree with you. But I think we will get a better indication of where the team's at, like you said, after the first 20 games or so of
Yes,
the
just
season.
just to go based off last season, it's going to be hard for me to believe that all of a sudden they're going to turn this massive corner with a 25 plus point increase just based on the way they were playing last season.
We'll see. Still got a top flight goaltender in between the pipes, which is always nice. Shades, John Carlson, he had his rights acquired by the Carolina Hurricanes, and they were unable to work out a deal for him. And he ends up going to the Tampa Bay Lightning on what's a pretty sweetheart deal. What do you got for me on that?
Yeah, I was actually surprised that Carolina wasn't able to strike up a deal with him in the first place. But Tampa getting him, even at his age 36 season, he put up 60 points last year on a young, up and coming Ducks team that kind of overperformed a little bit. But they still have a solid team, albeit a little bit older on the back end. But after what we saw last season with the Lightning, especially, they have and arguably still have one of the most loaded offenses in the league. The question is, can the defense and goaltending hold up? Because that has been a little bit of a question mark for them the last 2 years.
With the way the Florida Panthers loaded up, you needed to bring John Carlson in if you're the Lightning. I agree with you. I think they're pretty good up front. I think on the back end, they needed to really beef up a little bit, and they do that. Like you said, Carlson had 60 points last year, a majority of those points with Washington, but he after he came over to Anaheim, 14 and 16. Again, power play, quarterback, somebody who is aware on the defensive side of things. This is a great signing. I believe they got him for 8.5 million per season over 2 years, if I'm not mistaken. So if that is indeed the case for
Yep.
a 36-year-old defenseman, who I would argue is without a doubt the best 36-year-old defenseman in the league, you got to walk away happy with that, in my opinion.
And
And
you just have to be happy for them in general because
yeah,
if we're being honest, he was the best free agent available and they were able to grab him.
right. And they end up not re-signing Darren Radish to a long-term extension, and instead they bring in a player that fits their cup window a little bit better. I would say they have 2 to 3 years left in contention. I mean, I think John Cooper can definitely extend that, but I think if you're looking at the direct window that they have to win a Stanley Cup, it's this year and next year, and they have a big bad monster standing in their way, maybe two, with the Panthers and the Hurricanes. But John Carlson really bolsters what they had going on from last year. They were close last year, but they just weren't able to get over the hump in the East. So,
And you
and
can argue that they arguably should have been in the second round. They just ran into a Jacob Dobish who just looked phenomenal in the tail end of that series.
hey, and he's not a part of our lineup today on point to point, but shout out to Jakob Dobish, who signs an extension in Montreal. I believe he got himself 5 or 6 years. So that's well deserved, and the Habs have their number one goaltender for the first time since Carey Price.
Yep, and
Even
I
though,
will agree with you that Tampa does have 2 years left before things start to get dicey.
and on that note, Shades, I know that we are recording on Friday, July the 3rd. Happy 4th of July to everybody listening. If you are
Woo!
listening on the day or after the day, I'm going to ask you your number one contender in each conference following the first wave of free agent signings, the draft, and all of the trades that we have seen. And I'll leave it up to you. Do you want me to go first or do you want to go first?
How about this? I'll give you my answers in the East, and you give your answers in the West, and then we flip-flop.
Sounds good. Who do you got out of the East?
Even though they are in different divisions, I think it is going to be a dogfight for the number one seed between the Washington Capitals and the Florida Panthers. Florida is coming off a down year riddled with injuries, but like we already mentioned earlier in this episode, they have absolutely loaded up, and Washington did the same. And it is going to be a very interesting season to how this plays out to see who gets the number one seed.
So you're officially going?
You know what? Just because it's Ovechkin's last year, I'll give the nod to the Capitals or
Okay.
supposed last year.
I like it a lot. For me, Shades, I cannot look at this entire offseason and say that the Florida Panthers are not going to come out of the East again. They add Brady Tkachuk. They add Radko Gudas. They do not re-sign Sergei Bobrovsky. They bring in Jacob Markstrom. This team is even better than they were when they won their back-to-back Stanley Cups, and that's saying something. And if you're able to put a deeper roster and a healthy roster compared to what they had last year, I just don't see anybody stopping them. But with that said, I do concur that it's going to be an absolute dogfight between those two teams. And I'd like to give the Canadians a little bit of a nod too. I don't think that they'll win the East, but I think that they'll continue their positive trajectory up the standings.
I think they'll be in the mix for sure.
Yep. And shades onto the West. Who's coming out?
I'm not going to jump ahead here and say who's coming out of the West. I'll answer based on the initial question
Fair enough.
of who do I think is going to be the number one seed. I think by default, it has to be the Avalanche because if you look at the difference in the Central and the Pacific divisions, Colorado finished with 121 points for the number one seed in not only the Central division, but in the Western Conference. And the winner of the Pacific division was the Vegas Golden Knights at 95 points, which is a 26-point difference. And as we spoke about on Pucks and Brews yesterday, the Dallas Stars are in a little bit of a predicament, did not have a great free agency. It's just hard for me to even argue for a second team to be in the mix here for the number one seed.
I think that's incredibly fair to say. I mean, when you look at the standings from last year, they are what they are. I mean, the top three teams in the Central all had better points than the Vegas Golden Knights, who, of course, won the Pacific. But for me, Shades, I'm expecting a bounce back year out of the Edmonton Oilers, and I think that they are going to come out of the West.
I was just about to say, if you were holding a gun to my head and were forcing me to pick a team that was going to give them a run for their money, I would have said the Oilers.
And Freddie Anderson is a big reason why. And Connor McDavid being in the last year of his contract is also a big reason why. And we didn't really touch on this at all. Who's coaching the Edmonton Oilers? Break the news.
Yeah, Mike Babcock, eh?
Mike Babcock is coaching the Edmonton Oilers, and despite the controversy, he's a big reason why I have them pegged to come out of the West. Well, for Michael Shade Sparacino, my name is Liam Go Time Gotimer. This has been episode 2 of Point to Point. Thank you so much for listening. We will be back next Friday. But until then, stay safe, stay well, and as always, don't forget to do that hockey.